Hello. Well, we're in Acts, chapters 23 and 24. Up to this point, what's been going on with Paul? You guys are sure quiet.
He was almost flogged. Yeah. He was tied up and ready to be flogged. He was still dead.
Yeah, he was defending himself. Because the city was all in an uproar and everything, and they were going to they was wanting to kill him. In Acts 21, they were ready to kill him, but the commander of the Romans, one of the commanders came and rescued him and ordered him bound with 2 chains, which because everybody was trying to get Paul. I guess he assumed that Paul was the bad guy, so he, without question, just go ahead and chain him up, and so he can get to the bottom of the problem here, the root of the problem.
Well, they were listening to what he said for Gentiles.
Yeah. So anyway, he brings them into the barracks, and Paul's wanting to try to clear things up, and he tries to talk to him, and that doesn't go very well. Whenever he starts talking that he's going to go to the Gentiles, or that he was sent away to the Gentiles, so they had to forcibly, the Roman cohort had to forcibly take him away from the Jews and bring him into the barracks. So now Paul, the Lysias, or Lysias, however you say his name, the commander, is called a meeting. He wants to know why the Jews why they're accusing Paul, and what's going on. So he calls a meeting of the chief priests and the council, and ordered them to assemble. And then he brought Paul down to try to find out what the situation was. So Paul starts making his defense, and he's looking at the council, and he says, there in 23:1, he says, "Brethren, I have lived my life with a perfectly good conscience before God up to this day." And how could he say that? I mean, he was.
Thought that he was fulfilling God's will.
Yeah. I mean, even though he later on, some of the letters that he wrote, he admits, that he was a reviler and a persecutor of the Christians, and that he did all sorts of bad things. But he thought he was doing the right thing until he met Jesus on that road to Damascus. So Ananias, he was the high priest, and he orders those standing beside Paul to strike him in the mouth. And Paul tells them, God's going to strike you, you whitewashed wall. Do you sit to try me according to the law, and in violation of the law order me to be struck? Now, Paul said this these chief priests and scribes, I mean, all these council members and everything, here they are striking Paul. But Paul hadn't been convicted of anything yet. And Paul is a Roman citizen. So they have already violated the law here by doing that. The bystanders, they go, "How dare you talk to the high priest like this? Or do you revile the high priest?" And Paul's reply is, "I was not aware, brethren, that he was high priest, for it is written, you shall not speak evil of a ruler of your people." Why wouldn't Paul know this was a high priest? What's some of the possibilities here?
Didn't they have a rotation?
Well, that one of the things that I read in the commentary was that, first off, the Romans put in who they wanted as high priest whenever they wanted. But some of the commentaries I was reading was saying that Ananias, had got himself into some trouble during this time, and he was deposed for a while. And there was some debate in the commentaries I read about whether or not he was actually the high priest during this time. But even so, even if he was the high priest, he was just brought back as high priest. Paul wouldn't have known. Another thing that they brought up was that this meeting was called by the commander. So, and he ordered the council and everybody to be there. So they were not in charge of this meeting. The commander was in charge of this meeting. So it was not an official Sanhedrin meeting. And possibly Ananias would not have been in his high priest robes or whatever, so he may not have known that Ananias, he wouldn't have been able to tell, that he was the high priest. And I thought it was kind of humorous. I mean, the commentary said that even when Paul says, "I wasn't aware that he was," he still really didn't apologize for what he said. So, anyway. So we go on here, and now Paul is he's in a bad spot here, because he's having to defend himself, and he's already had a taste of what's going on here, and he's probably pretty certain that things are not going to go well. So, one of the questions here on our handout here is, why does Paul cause this disruption?
Well, when you divide your enemy, it's always helpful.
That's true. That's true. Like I said before, Paul had already had a taste of what was going on with from the previous encounter. So I think he probably felt that he was facing a stacked deck, you know. And so how does he cause this disruption?
Brings up the subject of the resurrection.
Yeah. He knew that... He knew that there was the Sadducees and the Pharisees. He knew that the Sadducees didn't believe in the resurrection. So he perceived, or he knew that there was groups of both in there in that council. He knew it caused a dissension. I want you to turn to Matthew chapter 10. You know, when Jesus was teaching his disciples, he told them a lot of things, and one of the things that he told them in chapter 10 of Matthew, starting in verse 16, he says, "Behold, I send you out as sheep in the midst of wolves. So be shrewd as serpents and innocent as doves." And what did he just do? He proved his shrewdness. Because he knew what was going on here. He used the available knowledge that he had to try to help his situation. You know, and he goes on to say, you know, tells them that, you know, that he's on trial for the hope and resurrection of the dead, and then when he said that raised a big discussion, and the assembly was divided, and because the Sadducees don't think that there's any resurrection, and nor an angel nor a spirit, but the Pharisees have not acknowledged them all. Yeah. 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 Yeah, and you know, and down here in verse 9 it says that some of the scribes of the Pharisee party stood up and began to argue heatedly, saying, "We find nothing wrong with this man. Suppose a spirit or an angel has spoken to him." You know, they was kind of leaning toward Paul's way. And I think, you know, if you remember back, whenever the apostles were brought before the council, and they wanted to do something with them whenever they'd healed that man, John, and Peter and John had healed that man, Gamaliel, he spoke up and says, you know, if this is from man, it'll go away. But if it's from God, then, you know, be careful, you'll be fighting against God. And I think that's kind of the way they were leaning here, you know, with Paul. You know, they're thinking, well, maybe, you know, how do we know? You know, maybe a spirit or an angel has given him this information. The commander, he's afraid Paul is going to be torn to pieces, so he ordered the troops to take Paul away from him by force and take him into the barracks. But verse 11 here says, but on the night immediately following, the Lord stood at his side and said, take courage, for as you have solemnly witnessed to my cause in Jerusalem, so you must witness at Rome also. You know, and if you call that verse back in Matthew chapter 10, Jesus told them that they're going to be witnessing or to give an account of what they believe to governors and high officials. And this is what's getting ready to happen. Paul's getting ready to defend his cause, defend the cause of Jesus, his belief in Jesus.
In that same chapter in Matthew, he tells them also that they don't need to worry about what they're going to say when that happens. That the Spirit is going to tell them what to say.
Right. Yeah, you know, Paul, I don't think he prepared beforehand whenever he was facing this council here and divided them so expertly. So now, well, one of the questions I want to, down at the bottom, says, why is it necessary for the Lord to occasionally provide reassurance? We have three scriptures. Let's just look at them. Acts 18:9. And the Lord said to Paul in the night by a vision, do not be afraid any longer, but go on speaking and do not be silent. Verse 10, for I am with you, and no man will attack you in order to harm you, for I have many people in this city. That's whenever he was at Corinth. And then, of course, we got 23:11, which is what I just read. And then another one was 23 through 26. This is whenever Paul was on the ship and they're in the midst of this storm. Verse 23 says, for this very night an angel of the Lord, an angel of the God to whom I belong and whom I serve, stood before me, saying, do not be afraid, Paul, you must stand before Caesar. And behold, God has granted you all those who are sailing with you. Therefore, keep your courage up. Keep up your courage, men, for I believe God that it will turn out exactly as I have been told. But we must run aground on a certain island. So why is it necessary for the Lord to occasionally provide reassurance?
Everybody needs to be encouraged that they're doing the right thing. Even now we do. We need to know that what we're doing, the things we're, and because our efforts are to do them in the name of God and in the name of Jesus for the glory of God. And we just need to be assured that we're doing the right thing. Keep going.
Do we sometimes have doubts?
I think it's awesome that Jesus appeared right to Paul and right to the apostles.
Yeah.
Right at the right time. I mean, I kind of wish he did now, but that's okay that he does because we have his word. But it's always timely.
I think maybe this might, I think this probably increase our faith, you know.
Makes you pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and be comfortable and
So now, we have a conspiracy. When it was day, the Jews formed a conspiracy and bound themselves under an oath, saying they would neither eat nor drink till they killed Paul. There were more than 40 who formed this plot. They came to the chief priests and the elders and said, "We have bound ourselves under a solemn oath to taste nothing until we have killed Paul. Now therefore you and the council notify the commander to bring him down to you as though you were going to determine his case by a more thorough investigation, and we, for our part, are ready to slay him before he comes near this place." And there's some hungry people, because it didn't happen. Yeah, here these people are. They're the backbone of the law. The priests and everything. And boy, look what they're doing here. They're just, they're just removing all stops to get Paul. Okay, well, verse 16 says, "But the son of Paul's sister heard of their ambush, and he came and entered the barracks and told Paul. Paul called one of the centurions to him and said, 'Lead this young man to the commander, for he has something to report to him.' So he took him and led him to the commander and said, 'Paul the prisoner called to me and asked me to lead this young man to you, since he has something to tell you.'" Paul was in a difficult situation here. And yet, for some reason or another, he trusted that the commander was going to be not submit to bribes, basically. Because all it would have took was this commander just to be corrupt, and Paul he'd be gone. So he must have thought that this commander was a pretty upstanding guy, a pretty someone that he could trust.
Well, it makes me wonder how his nephew could just walk in and talk to him. If it was in prison, you wouldn't think that you could just walk in and talk to a prisoner.
Yeah.
It kind of indicates to me that Paul had, even though he was under the protection of this centurion, this commander, that he wasn't really under arrest.
Well, yeah, and if you look back just a little bit there, see, I think they had him in the barracks, and I don't. Maybe it's somewhere else, but I was thinking that it said that he had a little bit of freedom, but maybe that was later on. But yeah, I don't think that he really thought Paul was the problem.
Well,
You know.
they took him to the barracks to get him as a protector from the Pharisees and the Sadducees who were going at each other, because the guy thought he was going to be torn to pieces.
Yeah.
So he was taken to the barracks for protection.
Paul had to have a feeling that this was probably all going to work out okay for him, but the Lord had just told him, you got to get rid of me alone.
Yeah. That's exactly right. Yeah.
So as apprehensive as it was, he had to know, had to feel it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. He'd been told that he's going to be witnessing in Rome, so he figured out somehow or another that it was going to work out somehow or another. He didn't know the specific plans, but he believed the Lord, this this young man, this Paul's sister's son, he evidently was in a position to hear this plot. One of the commentaries said that he was possibly kind of in the position of like Paul was, studying under Gamaliel. Well, they said, possibly he was in that type of a situation where he was studying, so he was kind of in their presence all the time, because he was learning, the way of the Jew. At any rate, he goes and tells the commander, and then the commander starts to make arrangements to get him out of there. So, what arrangements does the commander make to protect Paul? Yeah, yeah, he does. He takes the threat seriously. And why do you think? Why would he do that?
We talked about what happens to a guard whose prisoner escapes or gets away. What happens to a guard whose prisoner is murdered?
And keep in mind, Paul's a Roman citizen. He's not just a Jew. He's a Roman citizen. So that probably had a lot of bearing on this outlook that the commander had. This protection that he had, that he was going to provide Paul, and he made sure that it was big enough big enough group that it would make it discourage any interference. I like the letter that he wrote here. Let's look at it, starting in verse 26. He wrote a letter to Felix the governor. Claudius Lysias, to the most excellent governor Felix, greetings. When this man was arrested by the Jews and was about to be slain by them, I came up to them with troops and rescued him, having learned that he was a Roman citizen, or that he was a Roman. Well, what's this?
I was about to meet this man and learned that he was a Roman.
Yeah. He kind of left out a little bit of, kind of rearranged the thing a little bit there, didn't it? Rearranged the story just a little bit. Because when he was, in verse 21, when Paul was being beaten and stuff, because it says they was trying to kill him, and it was the Jews that was trying to kill him, and commander began asking him who he was and what he had done. He didn't know who he was. He didn't know he was a Roman citizen. And of course, later on there, when the commander ordered him to be scourged, that's when he found out. But anyway, so he lied a little. And wanting to ascertain the charge for which they were accusing him, I brought him down to the council, and I found him to be accused over questions about their law, but under no accusation, deserving death or imprisonment. And that may be why the nephew was able to go in there so easily, is because the commander didn't believe that he'd done anything wrong. He just wrote right here that he just didn't believe that anything that they accused Paul of deserved death or imprisonment. When I was informed that there would be a plot against the man, I sent him to you at once, also instructing his accusers to bring charges against him before you. So the soldiers took Paul down to Antipatris, I would say that. And the next day, leaving the horsemen to go on with him, they returned to the barracks. I guess they figured, that they'd went far enough that the 70 horsemen was good enough escort to. Besides, Paul was mounted too, so they could outrun anybody on foot. Figured maybe they was on foot. I don't know.
Especially since they've been starving for a few days.
Yeah, that's right. Can't go far without food and water. So he turns him over to the governor and presented the letter to him, and the governor asked him what province he was from, and when he learned he was from Cilicia, he says, "I'll give you a hearing after your accusers arrive," and gave orders for Paul to be kept in Harold's Praetorium, which governor's official residence. Pretty swanky place. Okay. Now the high priest comes down. High priest Ananias comes down with some elders and an attorney named Tertullus, and they brought charges to the governor against Paul. So Tertullus, he starts out by buttering up the governor, buttering up Felix. "Since we have through you attained much peace, and since by your providence reforms we are being carried out for this nation, we acknowledge this in every way and everywhere, most excellent Felix, with all thankfulness." A little buttering up here. Right? Let's get him in a good mood here. But that I may not worry you any further, I beg you to grant us by your kindness a brief hearing. Now here's the charges that they're saying right now. Verse 5 says, "For we have found this man a real pest, and a fellow who stirs up dissension among the Jews throughout the world, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. And he even tried to desecrate the temple, and then we arrested him." Now, to me, it seems to me like if I was the governor, I would look at them like, what? Why is he here before me? What has this got to do with anything that I'm in charge of? I mean, I don't know. It seems funny to me that he would even give them the time of day. Anyway, okay, so here, tried to desecrate the temple, and we arrested him. And I like this. We wanted to judge him according to our own law, but Lysis, the commander, came along and with much violence took him out of our hands, ordering his accuser to come before you. Now, who was being violent? Who was being violent during this encounter?
Once Lysias sent the soldiers in to get Paul, they were not gentle about
Probably not. But before that, who was being violent there? You know?
They started.
Yeah, he was being violent. You know, and they wanted to judge him according to our own law. You know, I find that funny. How are they going to do that? Like they did Stephen? Yeah, or Jesus? Yeah. Yeah. But by examining him yourself, concerning all these matters, you will be able to ascertain the things which we accuse him. And of course, everybody that was there, all the Jews that joined in the attack, they saying, all these things are true. Everything that he's saying is true. So the governor gave Paul the okay to go ahead and speak. So he makes his defense, or starts to make his defense before Felix. He talks about him going up to Jerusalem to worship. But he says, neither in the temple, nor in the synagogues, nor in the city itself did they find me carrying on a discussion with anyone or causing a riot, nor can they prove to you the charges of which they now accuse me. But this I admit to you, that according to the way which they call a sect, I do serve. I do serve the God of our fathers, believe in everything that is in accordance with the law and that is written in the prophets, having a hope in God, which these men cherish themselves, that there certainly will be a resurrection of both the righteous and the wicked. In view of this, I also do my best to maintain always a blameless conscience before God and before men. So, Paul makes his defense here. He brings up an interesting point, I thought, because he says that there's certainly going to be a resurrection. He believes that there's going to be a resurrection of both the righteous and the wicked, of the righteous and the wicked. He knows that both sides are going to face God one of these days. Of course, I can't remember. Let's see, was it Matthew 24? No. No, Matthew 25, where Jesus is talking about the judgment. He talks about when the Son of Man comes in His glory and His angels, how He's going to judge those that provided food and drink, and when He was hungry, and those that didn't. He tells the ones that didn't that there's going to be eternal punishment.
He talks about separating the sheep and the goats.
Yeah.
Sheep will be on his right hand and goats will be on his left.
Yeah. So then, Paul kind of touches on this, I think. But he mentions here in Acts chapter 24, verse 17, it says, now after several years I came to bring alms to my nation and to present offerings. in which they found me occupied in the temple, having been purified without any crowd or uproar. But there were some Jews from Asia who ought to have been present before you to make accusations if they should have anything against me. Or else let these men themselves tell what misdeed they found when I stood before the council, other than for this one statement which I shouted out while standing among them, for the resurrection of the dead I am on trial before you today. You know, Paul had been gone from Jerusalem for many, many years. He'd been, all over the Asia and and everything, preaching the Word of God.
I think
But
it's interesting that one of his first things he says in his defense was, I was only there 12 days. I could have caused so much trouble.
yeah, yeah. But they, like you said, the Jews from Asia, some of them were there, and that's, they recognized him, and they hated him just so much that, that they just kept following him around and just trying to cause problems, trying to kill him and everything everywhere he went. Now, of course, they're the ones that stirred everybody up in Jerusalem. Okay, well, Felix here, he's says here, having a more exact knowledge about the way, put them off, saying, when Lysias, the commander, comes down, I will decide your case. Then he gave orders to the centurion for him to be kept in custody and yet have some freedom, and not to prevent any of his friends from ministering to him. Felix, how did Felix have a more exact knowledge of the way? His wife was a Jewess, yeah.
Well, if he's in a position of authority, he's not clueless as to what's going on.
Wasn't Philip led to Caesarea as an evangelist?
I'm sorry, what?
Philip, the evangelist, he led to Caesarea.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. That's a good point. He, who knows? Philip might have been doing some preaching to him. Well, it was awful nice of him to let, you kind of wonder if Felix didn't kind of take what the Jews were saying with a grain of salt, because he didn't throw him in a hole or anything like that. He let him have some freedom and let his friends come to him whenever they needed to, and everything like that. So then, some days later, here Felix comes. He arrives with his wife Drusilla. She was a Jewess. And he sent for Paul and heard him speak about faith in Christ Jesus. But as he was discussing righteousness, self-control, and the judgment to come, Felix became frightened and said, Go away for the present. Go away for the present, and when I find time, I will summon you. So, Felix is not ready to listen to what Paul has to say. Really, he's got other motives on his mind, apparently. And we can see here that Felix was not above corruption. He's talking about verse 26, at the same time he was hoping that money would be given him by Paul. Therefore he used to send for him quite often and converse with him.
He was probably, I wonder if he was used to prisoners paying their way out.
Well, I think that's probably true.
Not even bail or bond, just here.
I think that's probably true. I think probably more than likely in his time there was some important people that got put in prison for one reason or another, and they probably had money, or his family had money, and they paid a little bribe.
Or he held it over their heads. Hey,
And maybe.
we don't know.
Well, he kept this up for 2 years, and then he was succeeded by Porcius Festus. And wishing to do the Jews a favor, Felix left Paul imprisoned. I wonder if the Jews paid him some money to keep Paul in there. You know, he could have been playing both sides. You pay me some money, and I'll keep him there. You pay me some money, and I'll release you. Who's got the most money, you know? Maybe that's what he was. I don't know. What can we learn from Felix's actions? What's that? Yeah, exactly.
I mean, in 22, he says he's going to decide the case quickly.
Yeah,
2 years is quickly now.
yeah. He's kind of wishy-washy, isn't he?
I think he does act like some people do nowadays, though, when you're trying to teach them and their conscience starts bothering them about the way they're living their lives. They would rather you shut up and not talk to them about it anymore than really delve into what the truth is.
Yeah. You know, probably, this is just my own thoughts, but I would imagine that probably Felix would have turned Paul loose if he'd have been able to. You know, if he wouldn't have been afraid of the repercussions from the Jews, from the Sanhedrin and all that. I think he probably would have turned Paul loose, especially when Paul was teaching about self-control and righteousness and judgment to come. I think Felix probably would have wanted him out of there if he could have. Go ahead.
It's the same situation with Jesus when he was found faultless in the crowd, you know, was so strong against the people. We know that with Jesus it was to fulfill prophecy.
Well, now Paul has to face another governor, explain himself all over again. So, next week, somebody else will talk about that.
And he was talking some topics, it says, righteousness, self-control, and the judgment to come. So Paul was getting into the serious topics here.
Yeah, yeah.
Wasn't keeping it light.
Yeah, you know, and Paul's doing what God had said that they would be doing. You know, they'd be defending themselves before governors and high officials and stuff like that. That's what Paul's doing, and Paul's not just saying, "Hey, let me go. I'm a good guy, and I don't deserve this." Paul was saying, "I believe in Jesus, and this is why I believe in Jesus, and This is why I believe in God, and this is what Jesus has done for me, and this is what you need to do to get your life right with God, and because there's going to be a judgment someday. I know I'm putting a lot in there that's not, but I think that's probably what he was doing. I think it's a safe assumption to believe that Paul was defending the faith. Yep. I'm going to go there. I just don't know how. I don't have the funds, but it's going to be provided for me. The way is going to be provided for me.